So in this final part of this 5-part series on indigenizing the psychology curriculum, I'll look at ways we can undertake a radical anti-racist stance in psychology that might bear some hope in undoing some of the damage psychology has done to the lives of Indigenous people. Why I'm negative about positive
Back to the story, because I've got a story.
So I've got some top tips on
I told you to think critically. It helps people like me stop doing stupid things.
For the Indigenising the Curriculum project in Australian psychology, we have a problem insofar as our approach mimics the type of infantilising and patronising approach adopted more broadly in Australian culture. In particular, we need to take a more critical look at the reconciliation framework that now dominates how psychology is proceeding. And that framework pushes restorative and procedural justice to the foreground. That's the sort of let bygones be bygones and let's just all get along type approach.
Can we all just get along?
And psychology spent very little or no time focusing on distributive and retributive systems of justice. That's the you need to pay for what you did wrong approach.
What? You are going to pay for that!
You can see why the latter approach is not popular among non-Indigenous communities, because moving forward will involve cost for non-Indigenous people. It also caused some pain and some loss, but that's likely what is needed. But no one's allowing the space for that to happen. So we need to think much more critically about the assumptions that are sitting behind how psychology is engaging with the Indigenising the Curriculum project, and we need to be much more mindful and honest about the pain inflicted upon Indigenous people during the colonisation of Australia. And the disappointingly late engagement of psychology with the Indigenising the Curriculum project actually offers some hope insofar as psychology is at a very early stage of the process. So there's a chance of steering the discipline in a different direction. You know, it's not too late. In fact, there are some signs of hope, such as the reference in the AIPEP curriculum framework document of a third space, which I mentioned in part 3. But we need to go further than that. We could, for example, bring critical race theory to the development of these frameworks. And that's being used to really good effect in South Africa, where they're addressing issues of colonisation and the aftermath of apartheid. That work is much more progressive than the sort of mainstream approaches adopted under South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Project.
It's not true that you and Kosen assaulted me throughout the trip.
If you say we assaulted you in the Kombi, then I would concede that in all probability I did.
That project's been mired in controversy. I mean, some people are saying really nice things about it, but I promise you, there's plenty of other people saying some really nasty things about it, and you'd be surprised who those people are. So such an approach, along with other critical approaches, the critical race theory approach, it would ask us to consider how non-Indigenous Australians, particularly white Australians, have a personal investment and material interest in depicting Indigenous people in certain ways, usually ways that cast Indigenous people as in some shape or form as defective.
Clearly you are defective beyond repair.
And it'll draw our attention to how Australian psychologists and higher education professionals share many of those same investments and interests, and have enshrined those depictions of Indigenous people into their professional practices. What we need to do is to focus our critical attention on the Indigenising the Curriculum project and to reject any attempt to deposit Indigenous knowledge into higher education repositories in any way that treats such knowledge as cultural artefact to be studied, or in any way that might ripen that knowledge to serve the powerful interest groups. I'm thinking here of that trawling of Indigenous knowledge by transnational corporations. And this happened and is happening to Indigenous health remedies, that have been trawled by pharmaceutical companies, and they've grabbed them, then patented them, and made vast corporate profits out of them. Now, the reconciliation agenda can't be given an uncritical passage. It needs to be considered whether Australian psychology's redemptive approach to Indigenous issues might be dovetailing into the centre-right political space in Australian culture and providing a point of least friction between Australia's conservative commentators and human rights activists. So it allows the conservative to maintain their paternalistic views of Indigenous people as somehow Indigenous people are less evolved, and it also feeds the appetite of human rights activists who want to protect and conserve the lives of Indigenous people. You know, this is a really dangerous compromise, and it maintains a position of deep denial in terms of the deep-rooted disruption that's lying ahead. Being at such an early stage, the ITC project, Indigenising the Curriculum project in Australian psychology, is also giving us much cause for pessimism, and that pessimism largely stems from the fact that it's happening in higher education. Things have not been so good in higher education recently. The HE sector has taken a managerialist turn in recent years and now largely functions like a business through the adoption of corporate practices such as the use of institutional templates to structure learning activities, to keep teaching resources on brand, the use of external benchmarking of courses and programs, growth of auditing cultures to such dominance that almost every aspect of the learning and teaching environment at university is now subject to stringent systems of surveillance and control. We also have crude, populist ranking systems to increase competition between and within universities. And we've got an alignment of all our teaching and learning practices and initiatives to corporate strategic plans. And all of this is having the effect of narrowing the curriculum rather than giving the possibility for us to widen the curriculum. It's not a good time for a curriculum project that might hope to diversify the teaching curricula in universities. All the signs point to the Indigenising the Curriculum project drawing Indigenous knowledge into a kind of quarantined and tightly regulated space. For the project to succeed, it's got to operate in a way that can generate friction and points of disruption with the existing knowledge systems that operate in the university system, and probably needs to produce some friction with the university systems in general. And that's the only way that might open us up to avoid knowledge becoming wrapped up in that paternalism and delivered into the curriculum in a kind of pre-sanitized form. Just Indigenous knowledge being used to service the ideological interests of non-Indigenous groups. If the project is done right, we should anticipate quite sharp and strong resistance, both from academics, administrators and managers within higher education, because if this curriculum project is done right, it's going to unsettle positions of privilege and power, and it's going to unsettle systems of vested interests. All of that stuff's going to get unearthed and examined, and people are going to argue for change. So the Indigenising the Curriculum project demands that sort of profound transformation if it is to disentangle itself from its racist past. Right now, Indigenous knowledge in the Australian psychology curriculum is given space to be seen, but not heard. And that's the thing that's got to change. So that's the end. Thanks for watching. I don't know if you've watched all of the 5 parts, but if you have, good on you. And see you later. Ta-da.